Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Bullet Train. And this film we center on the character of Ladybug. He is an assassin who has recently been pulled into this mission that he is not entirely sure how it is really going. He thinks he has a pretty simple job in mind, but he quickly realizes there are a lot of obstacles along the way and a lot of different people that are surrounded on this train that he has ventured on with many different motives, and he has to do what he can to really get to the bottom of this, but also survive the night. So Bullet Train, I was very excited for this film, especially with David Leitch being at the helm, who has proven himself to be a very strong action director, and also this getting moved to the beginning of August because the studio kind of saw it as like that kind of like late summer hit, kind of like that last big action film within the summer, and the fact that they had so much confidence in it really gave me that much more excitement. The marketing I thought was incredible. It had a really great cast behind it. It really seemed like it was on track to become one of the best summer blockbusters and what honestly has been a pretty lackluster summer movie season. And so I was really pulling for this film, and honestly that's kind of what I got. Bullet Train is a lot of fun. This is every bit as stylish and entertaining as you really do hope it would be, and I think it really is that like summer delight that I think a lot of people were hoping. I will say, for me, it's not quite as good as I was hoping, but I do think that as a really fun summer blockbuster, it does work as such, but we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast here. And I mean, like I said, I think going in this film, that's definitely one of the biggest draws. The cast here, it's a really stellar cast, a lot of really talented actors, and I think everyone really does end up delivering. I don't think there's a bad performance in the bunch. Let's start off talking about someone that honestly is kind of hard to talk about now because he's facing a lot of controversies within the news. There's a lot of stuff about him that's come out recently that is really not great at all. But I'm going to try to put that aside as much as I can and talk about Brad Pitt here, who does what I think he needs to do in this role as Ladybug. He's very fun. He's very charismatic here. He is very much playing the everyman in this movie, where he's this guy who's like really got himself into this situation, doesn't really know how to handle all of it, but he does handle that very well. He's very fun to watch here, and I do think that he sells this role very well. We'll get into his character a little bit later, but I do think that Pitt overall did a really good job within this performance. He really is every bit as he really is every bit as just like fun and charismatic as you really do want him to be, and I think that he portrays that role very well here. But also, playing this assassin that is definitely willing to get the job done, but also is very overwhelmed by the situation that is really going on. I thought he did a really good job with that. Joey King also gives, I think, easily one of her best performances to date here. The character that she's playing in this film of Prince is very ambiguous. You don't really know a lot of what's going on with her, but whenever this character is on screen, you are very intimidated by her. This character means a lot of business, and she is not willing to... She is not somebody that you want to cross, and King does a really great job, I think, in just showing the pure, the pure sinister side of this character. I think she does a really good job of tapping into that. We haven't really seen King play a role quite like this before, and honestly, I want to see more of it. I think that she recently has really been challenging herself as an actress, and this is easily, I think, one of her most impressive performances to date, just because of how different of a role it usually is from her. She really is doing something decidedly different than we've seen from her within her career, and I think it really does end up paying off here. This is a character that you're very intimidated by, but at the same time still is very like quippy and things like that, and I really enjoyed what she ended up doing in this film. But for me, easily, the standouts in this film are the combined efforts of both Brian Tyree Henry and Aaron Taylor Johnson. These two are just everything that you want to see within this film. They do a great job of playing these brothers that are constantly butting heads, but their banter and their rapport is just gold. Whatever it is that they're talking about, even if they're talking about something like a water bottle, for example, I mean, they are just so great in in this movie. I think that they absolutely are the highlight, but also add a lot of heart to the film. You really find yourself caring about both of them, and I think it's because of just how much effort both of them are putting into these roles, really doing what they can to make these characters feel memorable. Yes, we've seen duos like them before, but I thought they just did a really good job working together. They are very much responsible for just how absolutely hysterical so much of this film is, and they're really the kind of duo that you want to see more of. And when they're not on screen, you know, whenever they're on screen, the film just pops so much more. Everything around them is just so much more electrifying, and it really is because of their presence within the film. I really loved what they ended up doing here. I think they alone are enough a reason to see this movie. I loved what they did in this film. The other, you know, everyone else in the cast I think does do a really good job here. Andrew Koji, Hiroyuki Sanada, you know, they're good for what they have. Michael Shannon does not have a huge role in this film, but for what he has, he did a good job. Same with Zazie Beetz, and then Sandra Bullock, I think, does a really good job as this handler of sorts who is guiding Ladybug throughout everything. I think she does do a good job in this film. Really, the entire cast, I think everyone really did, you know, everyone seemed like they were having a ton of fun, and I think the cast definitely did end up delivering here. Alright, but now let's get into the directing and the writing here, which, talking about David Leitch as a director, I've seen a lot of people talk about him and how he is one of those directors where the films he has taken on, he himself has an energy, he definitely has a confidence to him, but he doesn't really have a style of his own, and I feel like that isn't necessarily the case. Yes, I think his style is very evocative of something like a Quentin Tarantino or something like that, very obvious, especially this film, very obviously he is trying to, I think, pay homage to Quentin Tarantino in that way, but he definitely does have his own style. It's very snappy. It's very for this entire movie, and I think he did do a really good job of that. This movie is very funny at points. There were a lot of moments that definitely did have me laughing. He also does a good job when it comes to the action side of things. I think the film is very propulsive, and I think he does a really good job when it comes to that in this movie. There definitely is an energy to this film that I think had Leitch not directed it would not have been there, and I think that is something that he overall did do just a really good job with. I think one of the reasons you're so invested into this film is because of you know, what he's doing. He's never afraid to go into some really crazy directions with this film as well. I mean, this film goes in so many ridiculous directions, and you have to have real confidence in yourself as a director to do that, and Leitch absolutely does go there. The film is very self-aware of what it wants to be, yet it isn't afraid to pay homage to visionaries, and I think that he does do a really good job with that. Getting into the screenplay, this is where I think the film is a bit more flawed in quite a few areas, which I'll get to the things that work really well. One of the things I really did appreciate about this story is how layered everything going on here is, right? Because we have a pretty simplistic mission. Everybody in this case is, you know, in this film is vying for this suitcase, whether it be for selfish reasons, whether it be for something a bit more meaningful. Everybody wants their hands on this suitcase, and so we have this really, you know, compelling story going on, and the film really does try to get you to understand what everyone's motivation is surrounding this suitcase, what it really is all about, how all of these characters are connected in that way. And I think that part of the film it does do a really good job with, because it does get you attached to quite a few of these characters. I already mentioned the duo of Brian Tyree Henry and Aaron Taylor Johnson, but the characters that they're playing, you know, one of the reasons they are such big standouts is because you really do care about them within this film. Their whole reasoning for what they're doing, I thought, worked really well here. Joey King in this film and what she's really doing. Her motivation is kind of unclear throughout this movie, and you start to make more sense of it as the film does go on, and I thought that was something they did a really good job with, whether it's Andrew Koji's character, you know, there's a whole other reasoning why he's involved with everything, so I think the film does do a good job with getting you to latch onto these characters. I think the problem is that the film is kind of missing the structure that someone like a Tarantino, someone like a Guy Ritchie, someone like a Steven Soderbergh even, are able to have. And I think that's what ultimately does bring this film down a bit. It just feels a bit disjointed at points. And I think as a writer, Zach Olkewicz, he did a good job in laying the groundwork for this story and getting you to latch onto everything. But there's a lot happening. We're very much thrust into this story immediately. And while everything does eventually intersect, it can feel very overwhelming at points. I had a very hard time remembering everything that was going on because the film is really just kind of zipping through a lot of things. This is not one of those movies where, it's unlike a Tarantino or a Guy Ritchie, it's not divided into chapters. And I kind of feel like it maybe should have been, because I think that would have been an easier way, more digestible way to tell this story with just how much is going on here. There was a point where I'm like, okay, you just need to pump the brakes a little bit, because I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around how everybody is connected, why this character, is so adamant about, going after, this person, why this mission is so important to them, what is the history between these characters. There were some things that I think the film, we needed a bit more clarity on, and I think that would have elevated it overall. That being said, the things it does well, it does do really well. Like I said, the movie is very funny. The fact that I even have these criticisms is really, to the film's, it is a positive, I think, because it shows how invested I was within these characters. Again, I just wish the film took a little bit more time to focus on them a little bit more. So I think that is something they could have improved upon. The larger issue with the screenplay for me is really concerning our lead character in Ladybug. And it's not so much that I think his character is bad. The problem is, because everything else is so much more interesting, his story just isn't as compelling in comparison. I didn't find myself latching on to Ladybug as much as I would have hoped. I think his character works in the sense of he's this everyman. He doesn't really want to be in this situation. He's constantly lamenting. He always seems to be prone to bad luck. There's kind of this whole thing with him, going through bad luck constantly and not really having any sort of courage, not really having any sort of optimism whatsoever, and slowly gaining more of it. I think that's a pretty good arc for him, but other than that, there just isn't really a lot to this character. We find out some things about him, but I just think it could have been expanded upon more, because compared to everybody else, he just felt a little light to me in terms of characterization, and I thought they could have done a little bit more to really just compel you to Ladybug. I wouldn't say he's a great lead character. He's fun, and Pitt plays him well, but I wouldn't say he is on the level of literally everybody else in this movie that I just found way more compelling. So I do think that is something that does bring the screenplay down, but the things it does well, it does do really well. The layered characterizations and things like that, all of that is very well presented in this movie. And like I said, the movie is very funny. There's a lot of great comedy here that very much did have me laughing. There's one gag in particular involving this recurring object, and I didn't know if it was going to work at first, but they did it, and it really ended up working because the movie really did commit to it, and that's something that I definitely really did appreciate overall. But I think one of the big reasons people came to this movie is for the action sequences, and let me just say, they absolutely do deliver. They are every bit as kinetic and brutal as you really are hoping them to be. This film really doesn't hold back on that front very much at all, and that's something that I really did appreciate. I think, the hand-to-hand combat, all of that is really well handled. Even the stuff you saw within the trailer, you haven't seen the half of it, and this film really does show you that. I really did enjoy a lot of the action within this film. Even towards the third act, where the film goes off the rails a little bit, the action is always a highlight, and I thought that's something that definitely did end up delivering for me. I thought the score was also really well done here. I really did enjoy the score throughout this movie. And the editing, like I said before, it's very snappy, it's very quick. I do think the film would have benefited from a slower pace if they really just took the time to get us to know some of these characters a little bit better, but I didn't really feel the pacing. I think those 2 hours overall really do fly by, and I think that's something that this film does benefit from. My only other real issue with this movie really is concerning the third act, which I will just be honest, I did not really like the way this movie concluded. It wasn't so much the idea of how everything wrapped up. It's really just the way everything comes together, the way it happened, it just felt like the film got a little too ridiculous for my liking. And I understand this movie isn't trying to take itself too seriously. This movie is trying to have fun in that way. I just felt the film went a little too ridiculous when it came to some of the decisions that were made within this movie. There is a character that is hinted at and then introduced in the third act and tries to tie everything together, and it just felt kind of flimsy to me. And I also felt like this character maybe should have been introduced a little bit later on, because it brought up this element to another character that I think we kind of should have saw from the beginning, because it would have made some of the motivations a bit clearer to me. And then the actual way the movie ended, I just wasn't really all that big on. There are a lot of things that the movie does that just didn't really quite work as well, and I just felt the movie lost some of its edge in the third act. The movie lost some of the stakes within the third act because of the way everything is implemented. Like I said, I get that this movie is trying to be just really fun and silly, but it just got to a point where it just became hard for me to really just continue vibing with what they were doing. After a certain point, I was just like, I don't really know if this works. I really don't know if I can jive with this in the way that the movie wants me to. But I understand what they were going for. I just don't think it worked out quite as well. There's also just a few characters here that I just felt should have amounted to a bit more than what they were. I don't want to get into it too much for those who haven't seen this movie. I know plenty of people have seen this movie, but just for those that haven't, I'm not going to divulge into that too much. But I do think that did bring the movie down. And to be honest, like with the way the third act happened, it kind of soured some of the movie for me for a little bit. I was like, I don't even know if I like this movie, but because of how strong everything leading up to it was, with the characterization, with the humor, with the style of it all, with how much I was into the actual mission, at the end of the day, I can say I do think this is a really fun ride. Yes, it can be very convoluted. Yes, I do think the movie would have benefited more from really taking its time to develop some of these characters. Yes, I do think that the movie goes off the rails a bit in the third act, but it has some really strong performances. It has some really interesting ideas, and it definitely does have a style of its own that I do think works very well. It's just a really fun action blockbuster, some really fun performances, some very memorable characters. Bullet Train did deliver overall in the way that I wanted to. I don't think it was quite as good as I was hoping, but I think if you want just a really fun action blockbuster that can be kind of generic at points, but is trying to do something a little bit different than films we just don't really see a lot these days, I do think Bullet Train is definitely going to overall entertain you. So overall, I am going to give Bullet Train a B-. So with that, guys, my review of Bullet Train. Let me know what you guys saw this movie. I'll love your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.